We've got three incredible speakers with us today. We're going to start with Omar Aziki, who's from Attack Maroc, who will talk us through a bit about the current system, its violence, and the way Attack is resisting. And then we're going to go to Lebahan Liapolofeko, who's going to share her visions for African feminist economies and what they could be. She's an activist scholar and works with the Trade Collector. And then finally, you hear from Kali Okuno, who will share the stories of Cooperation Jackson and how that's putting alternative economics into practice. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about Omar Aziki, who is, as you can see, a member of the National Secretariat of Attack, CADTM Maroc, which is, as well as a member of the Shared International Secretariat of the Committee for CADTM, is the Committee for the Abolition of Illegitimate Debt. Just a little bit more about Omar. Attack Morocco is an action-oriented popular education association committed to the struggles in Morocco against capitalist globalization and the domination of the international financial institutions and government bodies that support neoliberal policies. And he's also a trade union activist in the sector. So I'm going to go to Omar first, and then we will share a little bit about each speaker before they come on.
Ok, ça va, tout est bien installé. Je crois que j'ai une bonne connexion alors que parfois ça coupe. J'espère que ça ne coupera pas. Donc, je vais commencer d'abord en remerciant Thousand Current et les différents organisateurs de cet événement et qui m'avoir donné l'opportunité de parler sur le sujet sur lequel nous travaillons beaucoup à Attaque CADTM Maroc, mais aussi au réseau CADTM globalement, c'est la question de la dette. Donc, la question de la dette et les institutions financières internationales comme instrument. Donc, je voudrais d'abord commencer par à dire que la dette, ou le système dette plus précisément, est lié à la question de la souveraineté nationale des peuples dans sa globalité. Souveraineté politique, souveraineté économique, souveraineté financière, alimentaire, énergétique, technologique, etc. Et on voit que le système de la dette a toujours été un mécanisme pour asservir les peuples de la part des créanciers, que ce soit les puissances impérialistes occidentales ou leurs institutions financières internationales ou encore les grands spéculateurs financiers privés. Donc déjà au temps des colonies, temps de colonisation, la dette constituait avec ce qu'on appelait les accords de libre-échange, les deux mécanismes de subordination qui préservent l'hégémonie des puissances occidentales. Et à la période des indépendances, à l'obtention des indépendances dans les années 50 et 60, la majorité des pays de l'Afrique s'endettent de nouveau afin de financer leurs économies qui ont été pillées par le colonialisme. Donc, ils s'endettent de multiples manières. D'abord, à travers la dette coloniale. Donc, la dette de la période de colonisation a été reportée sur le nouveau gouvernement et régime après les indépendances. La dette commerciale. Donc, il y avait un surplus de liquidités dans les banques du Nord. La dette bilatérale. Donc, les pays occidentaux prêtent pour que les pays du Sud importent les biens venus du Nord, et aussi la dette multilatérale qui est contractée envers les institutions financières internationales dont on va parler tout de suite. Donc, à partir de cela, tout ce mécanisme mis en place de la dette et du libre-échange, de ce qu'on appelle le libre-échange, a maintenu les pays, de la majorité des pays du tiers-monde et de l'Afrique en particulier, dans une situation de sous-développement. Et on assiste à un ensemble de transferts négatifs intenses de l'Afrique vers les capitalistes du Nord, d'abord au niveau financier. Donc, on voit que le service de la dette, le remboursement de la dette constitue entre 30 et 60% des budgets nationaux, mais aussi à travers des fuites illicites de capitaux, etc. Mais aussi des transferts en ressources minières, forestières, agricoles, génétiques, etc. Donc, c'est pour dire que ce transfert intense par le mécanisme de la dette vers les capitalistes du Nord, mais non pas seulement la dette sert pour les capitalistes à maintenir les peuples du pays du Sud, mais également au niveau des peuples du Nord aussi. On assiste au même programme d'austérité dans les pays du Nord aussi. Donc au final, le coût de la dette publique est directement reporté sur la majorité des populations pauvres. Donc, soit à travers les politiques du programme d'ajustement structurel, soit à travers les politiques d'austérité globalement. Donc, à travers les paiements des taxes élevées sur le produit de consommation, l'absence ou l'insuffisance des services publics, auxquels les peuples ont droit, comme la santé, l'éducation, l'assistance, etc., comme on a vu pour la crise sanitaire de Covid, et aussi le pillage illimité des richesses naturelles avec tous les dommages environnementaux que cela implique. Et pour dire quels sont les instruments de système dette, bien sûr, c'est le système financier à travers les grandes banques privées et leur holding, mais aussi les organismes financiers internationaux, principalement le Fonds monétaire international et la Banque mondiale, aussi les agences de notation et les banques centrales et de développement, entre autres. Donc, ce mécanisme, ce pouvoir financier assujettit les nations à travers les dettes publiques, mais aussi les personnes privées à travers les dettes privées, comme le microcrédit qui est en train qui est en train d'envahir les pays se développer. Donc, on voit aujourd'hui que la dette est le principal outil, constitue un principal outil de la mondialisation capitaliste et aussi permet d'accélérer la privatisation de l'économie et créer un appauvrissement massif. Donc, aussi la dette, elle était utilisée à l'échelle internationale parce qu'elle est très efficace pour exploiter les individus et elle contribue aussi à démobiliser et pour ne pas engendrer de résistance générale. Donc, la dette n'est pas un instrument, n'est pas seulement un instrument économique, mais c'est aussi une arme politique. Donc, cette dette fait partie d'un système qu'il s'agit de combattre dans son ensemble, c'est le système capitaliste. Et d'où, nous, dans le réseau CADTM Attaque, on dit qu'il faut finir avec ce système dette en revendiquant l'annulation des dettes que nous considérons illégitimes, que ce soit les dettes publiques, que ce soit les dettes privées, et bien sûr, essayer de couper avec ces institutions financières internationales et leurs politiques d'ajustement structurel, d'austérité et de libre-échange. Et donc, on a vu aujourd'hui que la pandémie de coronavirus et les autres aspects de la crise multidimensionnelle du capitalisme mondialisé justifient en soi la suspension du remboursement de la dette. Donc, pour nous, il faut essayer d'initier, contribuer à l'initiation des mobilisations populaires massives et contribuer aussi à la construction de mouvements sociaux forts pour inverser le rapport de force en faveur des couches populaires. Donc, on voit aujourd'hui qu'à l'échelle internationale, il y a plusieurs initiatives pour l'annulation de la dette, que ce soit en Europe, en Amérique latine, en Afrique, etc. Mais donc, simultanément aussi à l'annulation, à la revendication de l'annulation de la dette, oui, il est indispensable de mettre en pratique d'autres alternatives radicales. OK. OK, j'ai terminé. Merci. Vous m'entendez? J'ai terminé mon intervention. Merci.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Omar, for kind of, grounding us in those realities of what's going on. I just want to check in that we are hearing the Spanish interpretation. I've got some messages that's, just want to check that, that we are okay for Spanish interpretation. Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. Just before I go on, apologies, sincere apologies. I've mispronounced our incredible thinker who is our second panelist today, and so who is Lewahan Peiku Diapolo. Am I saying that right?
Nearly there.
Yes, okay. Apologies about that. I'll just say a little bit more about Levohan before we get started with her presentation. So she is an activist scholar, academic, public intellectual and movement builder, an African feminist, and a development practitioner for over 25 years. Her research interests are in African political economy, states and nationhood, international trade and global financial governance, the feminization of poverty, regional integration and impacts of globalization on labor migration. She's a senior research fellow at Research and Policy Advocacy think tank Trade Collective. Beku's work is grounded in popular movement struggles using a race, class and feminist lens. She has used this frame across organizations and in the classroom, and she's contributed to several books on international trade, development, politics, and feminist studies. And she is considered a leading expert on African political economy, feminist economics, international trade, and African development. To date, she's lived and worked across 41 countries, including 16 years in the UK. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah. And I think in the interests of language democracy, I need to ground myself. So ke a dumedisa kaofela kajeno lena na ke a tshepa hore kaofela lona le phetse hantle and ke tlisitse matla le matla modimo le matla a tsebo. So basically, I'm just saying that I hope all is well. And I'm here with a message of power and I hope of encouragement for all of us as we travail through this time. I want to start really exactly where my good colleague Omar has left off. And this is with the idea that we have inherited a system of debt which women have been cross-subsidizing across the African continent for the past 350 years, because I trace the current trajectory of socio-economic deficit, which has now been polarized by this moment called the COVID-19 crisis, but to the transatlantic trafficking of human beings, and that this is actually a linear path of a history of pandemics. So the pandemic of colonialism, the pandemic of the slave trade, the pandemic of financialized markets, the pandemic of structural adjustment, the pandemic of globalization and globalized meltdowns, as we have seen over the last 12 or 15 years. I also want to associate myself with the notion of structural adjustment is really the modern day sort of iteration of the dismantling of states, the dismantling of social protections, the dismantling of education and public healthcare facilities, and the notion that those who must, user fees are the only way to recover costs, rather than thinking of a much deeper social ecology. So I'm going to center my remarks on that, and it's a kind of a sandwiched presentation in case I run out of time. So I want to say a bit of it now and a bit of it later. But basically, suffice to say that across the African continent, there are no real feminist feminist interventions. There are no real gendered interventions, and the ones that do exist within an ongoing and an overriding neoliberal and market orthodox framework. So just to give an example, this is what the African Union has said. And it has said that gender, and in the context of COVID, is really the cornerstone of its development agenda. And they have mentioned a few key things that are very important to them. So one is sex desegregated data, and stating that, of course, that COVID-19 responses must be backed by data, which I don't dispute. Secondly, they also talk about gender budgeting and financial responses to COVID-19, which need to be more gender reactive, which I don't per se dispute, but I do have a few issues with that. They also mention here that, of course, that it's also very important to go into the realm of IT, social infrastructure, development infrastructure, and really what they do is they provide a boot camp for how to recover using the current neoliberal or market orthodox models. What I'd like to suggest here as well is rather that states and industry really ought to recognize that the parallel economy, with what people often call the informal economy, is actually centered in the reality of most African people's realities, because what we understand is that 80% of people on this continent are not employed in a 9-to-5 sort of way, but they are certainly occupied and they are earning income. And what COVID-19 must do is to recognize that the languaging of work and the definition of work has to catch up with the lived reality of most people across the global south. And I know that this is not only across the African continent, the figures also correlate with the experience across much of Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Latin America. Secondly, also that neoliberal orthodoxy or market-led orthodoxy or capitalism, whatever we want to call it, but it's the same stuff, really then suggests that markets are self-correcting. And the arrogance of that is that it suggests that if there's an oversupply of a commodity, then the prices will go down, which means that some producers, some suppliers, and some traders are going to get out of market and out of prices, and then the prices will just go back to normal. This just isn't true, because what has actually happened is that there's now the invisible hand in markets, which causes, I think, sometimes intentional cycles of market failure and economic volatility, rent seeking, corruption, and social dispossession, primarily of women. Thirdly, I'd like to also suggest here, and this is of course the composite of many thoughts of many African feminists that we have gathered, and I'm merely repeating these, that localized food supply chains ought to be bolstered with monetary and resource support, going directly to the smaller, to support smallholder farmers across Africa as well. And this is really, some of these thoughts also are drawn from a document that was drawn up by a group of African feminists, I think many of them are on this call, which was directed to some of the envoys, the African Union envoys. And we're not sure what's become of it, but certainly when the diagnosis of this leads to us also asking about the role of the state, and I think some of the things that Omar was talking about, that states don't really behave as states anymore. States have actually been hollowed out since structural adjustment. They have actually become nothing other than shells for corporate interest to play as they wish to. And I think to also mention that feminist bailouts, I think, are the way to go as opposed to your conventional bailouts. Because what these do is they suggest that we are going to have a much more sustainable, nourishing, and ecologically balanced way back. The current bailouts really work on the model that we need to recover what has been lost. And what has been lost right now are corporate profits primarily. This whole dogma around building back better, I think, is really quite futile. We should be building forward radical and building new radical rather than building back better, because what we had has failed us quite significantly. Now, to come really very briefly to a case study example of what South Africa, for example, has done. They've done a few things, and what we've done here is, firstly, a few fiscal and monetary interventions, which are supposed to bolster the economy and provide safety nets for the most economically vulnerable and the most economically dispossessed, and the ones who are often, largely Black women. So the face of poverty in this country and across the continent is largely the face of a Black woman. And really this includes some measures such as tax relief and funding initiatives They've also tried to stabilize the economy with very little success, no success actually, by addressing the decline in supply and demand and attempting to protect jobs. It hasn't happened so far. We've shed hundreds of thousands of jobs, the largest amount of jobs in the last century. And they've also tried to think through stimulus package, which are then going to balance out the current fiscus. So this means, for example, looking at child support grants, looking at increasing the ways in which beneficiaries and even the definitions of the unemployed who don't receive any other form of social protection are then able to then participate in the economy. My gripe with this are several actually. The one is that social protection and social grants social welfare in this instance is not linked to any attempt to then redistribute wealth and access and power. It is actually an attempt to continue to provide a glut of people who will remain an underclass, who will remain precarious, and who will remain marginal in the economy. This also doesn't recognize, and this is where I think we need to go into the sort of the forward-looking post-capitalist dream or wish list, is that precarity has been normalized. We call it the gig economy, we call it the hustle, we call it whatever. But what it actually means is that even the K economy, which I think is mischaracterized, and as a result of its mischaracterization, has not been funded appropriately, has not been valorized appropriately, and where women who are mainly in this so-called care economy, which actually bolsters the market economy. What this means is that this precarity is now going to be elongated by the coronavirus. It's been highlighted, but what then the social benefit model or the social welfareist model, as it has been conceptualized in South Africa and in many other African states, is such that it then is going to create a pathway to endless precarity, to endless marginalization. It doesn't in any way challenge the structural power of those who are, the haves who continue to have, and the have-nots who have even less than before. I think that I'd also like to add here that some of the other interventions which the African Union have spoken about include your ICT, skills development, PPPs, which I have a very, very dim view of. And what I'm suggesting here is that the capitalist system is deeply illogical. And what feminist economics, especially in the African context, has illustrated is that we can have a convergence of progressive environmental and feminist thinking, ecological thinking, and new forms of looking at what well-being actually is. This fetishization of growth, for example, has to end because, and my suggestion is that when we get rid of the growth imperative, we then realize that our planet and ourselves have finite resources. So the idea that we need to grow in order for the economy needs to grow in order for people's well-being and livelihoods to grow is absolutely a fallacy, which is why you have a Jeff Bezos, you have a Bill Gates, you have a Elon Musk, the boy from Pretoria once upon a time. And these are people who, in the midst of the coronavirus, have grown their personal wealth at the expense of about 6 billion other people. So clearly that kind of model of increased wealth, which is deeply individualized, as opposed to a collective redistribution of this wealth, is deeply problematic. I also suggest that the fetishization of individual responsibility, this bootstraps mentality, which suggests that it's about personal achievement, lean into it, do your best, work hard, get a degree, get about the hustle. You too can be like this. And it's absolute nonsense, because what it actually is about the unfettered accumulation of power, of capital by a few white males. And what really capitalism needs to do is to recreate itself in the image of Black women, Black and brown women across this world. And this is not just about compassionate economics, and it's certainly not about compassionate capitalism, because I don't think capitalism can ever be compassionate. And I think some of the Build Back Better dogma tries to say that we can soften it and put pink ribbons in it and it's going to be better. It never will be. What we do have to do is to reverse the destruction that has come through these structural challenges, such as privatization of debt, such as the lack of national sovereignty over public and private policy spaces, development policy spaces, but also to center women in all of these. So for example, by appreciating that a feminist economy is one where women are centered in all policy consideration. It sounds really simple, and it sounds really and it almost sounds as though it's it sounds like a wish list, but we've actually started to do it. The fact that GDP has already been challenged as one of the only forms of measuring growth illustrates that feminist economics is already gaining ground. Of course, with feminist economics is also giving the world fantastic instruments and tools in measuring the ecology, the wealth and the health of the planet, and aligning that with the health and the wealth of people, of communities, and really closing down and changing the notion that that there is there are these dichotomies between the earth and people, between women and men, between older and younger generations, between ourselves and even other species. And that this is really this is a much more egalitarian way of distributing benefits on this planet. And last, it's really important to mention here that, of course, that the Corona moment is really a reproach on existing colonial and imperial relationships. So whatever happened or did not happen for this virus to flare up, healthcare systems have collapsed, education systems are collapsing because we're forced to homeschool and so on and so forth. The notion of what work and the workspace and the private space has also collapsed, leading to absolute fatigue, constant fatigue. And these are the sorts of things that when we think about capitalism being reformed, it cannot be reformed. When we think about a pathway out of capitalism, these are some of the hardcore issues that we need to think about. So the genocide of capitalism over the last 150 years in this particular construction is really the thing that needs to be dealt with. And our recovery is completely inseparable from that. Our recovery is completely inseparable as Black women, as Black and brown women across the world, is inseparable from the complete destruction and the demolition of neoliberal, white-led, white masculinized capitalism. I think I'll leave it right there for now.
Wow, thank you. So many incredible takeaways there, nuggets, quotes, particularly thinking about what it would mean for capitalism to recreate itself in the image of Black women. I was like, wow, that's so that's something. So yeah, massive thank you. We're gonna go into hearing from Callie next. And I'll just tell you a little bit about Callie. Who is the co-founder and director of Corporation Jackson and the co-editor with Ajama Nyangwaya of Jackson Rising, the struggle for economic democracy and self-determination in Jackson, Mississippi. Callie has served as the director of special projects and external funding in the mayoral administration of the late Chokwe Lumumba of Jackson, Mississippi. His focus in this role was on supporting cooperative development in the introduction of eco-friendly and carbon reduction methods of operation and the promotion of human rights and international relations for the city. Callie also served as co-director of the US Human Rights Network, the executive director of the People's Hurricane Relief Fund based in New Orleans, Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina, and was the co-founder of the School of Social Justice and Community Development, a public school serving the academic needs of low-income African-American and Latino communities in Oakland, California. So yeah, star-studded lineup today. So I'll pass it over to Callie next up. Thank you.
All right, greetings everyone. I'll try to speak slowly for the interpreters. And I want to do a screen share just to give folks a little grounding in our work and how we frame some of our work. And these are all scenes of our work from 2020. And I apologize for bringing this on late, but we didn't have electricity and heat in large parts of our region yesterday. We are currently experiencing a historic freeze throughout about 2/3 of the United States, actually. Hopefully this will wake up all the climate change deniers in our country, but I doubt it, but we'll see what kind of impact this has. But in any event, what I wasn't able to do, I'm going to try to share now a bit. So just bear with me, and sorry for some of the tech challenges. All right, while it's loading. A couple of just a quick things while this is going on, so everybody have some grounding in some aspects of our work and how we got to this particular place. Jackson is the capital city of the state of Mississippi. It roughly has 200,000 people, so by US standards, it's kind of a mid-sized town, really. But it is the capital of this particular settler colonial project. And it is 80% Black. Under quote unquote normal times, Black unemployment is easily 50%. And since COVID-19, it has skyrocketed. We couldn't even fathom to give you a proper number. And most of the city services, I would say in many respects have collapsed, particularly in the course of the last 6 months as a result of COVID. Most of the city offices are completely shut down. And this is not just because of the mismanagement of the Trump administration, which was severe enough, but folks need to know that there is a very sophisticated, very entrenched right-wing infrastructure that Trump actually inherited or kind of drew from. Mississippi is one of the cornerstones of that. And if folks found, his behavior, his rhetoric, his posture, his misogyny to be offensive, our joke to everybody was for a number of different years was, welcome to Mississippi. This is what we've been living with basically since the end of the Reconstruction governments in the 19th century. And these are just styles and idioms that he picked up and really popularized and put to popular effect on a national and international level. And I cite that just so folks know that within these dynamics, now Mississippi, let me back up just a little bit. Mississippi is 40% Black throughout the entire state, roughly about 55% white. And then as they designated other, there's like 5% other, which is a combination primarily of Choctaw, who are the indigenous inhabitants of most of Mississippi, what is now Mississippi. And then immigrants that span from China, Vietnam, Korea, Nigeria, Ghana, in the main, right? And that is what constitutes the core composition of Mississippi. Now, I cite all of this to say that, and for folks to understand that Jackson fundamentally, I would say for the last 30 years, since it became a majority Black city, which didn't happen until the 1980s, under this neoliberal kind of strategy of capitalism, this variant of it, it's basically become a sacrifice zone. And if we have been trying to work our way out of being this kind of sacrificial lambs, utilizing our own creativity, first and foremost, our own determination, and then drawing on the accumulation of skills and resources that we have in the community to build a different future, to build our way out of it. And I think this is critical to note because there are many people who come here internationally who are then shocked to see the conditions that exist in Jackson, Mississippi and other parts of Mississippi, figuring that since this is in the heart of the beast, that it is quote unquote more developed, whatever the hell that means to different people, that is more developed than other places throughout the world, only to find the shocking reality that this cannibalistic beast will eat everything and anything within its path. It doesn't matter if it's internal to this particular project or external to it, really doesn't matter. But there are particular populations which, like canaries in the mine, are sacrificed first, and we are one of those populations in this context within the United States who fall within that category. Now, our understanding of this, there's a particular set of models that come within our kind of historical movement and tradition. Self-determination, self-respect, and self-reliance, and self-defense. Like these are the four kind of cornerstones, excuse me, that our project is built upon. and really rest on this notion that there's nobody coming to save us. We fundamentally have to save ourselves and utilize the tools and resources we have at our disposal to do so. Now, a large part of our program was really fashioned as Cooperation Jackson from the experience that many of us shared after Hurricane Katrina, where the US government willfully and intentionally left thousands, tens of thousands of Black folks to die, not just in New Orleans. I know many of you all saw that, but remember that storm hit all the way from Texas all the way over to southern Florida. And it did most of its devastation in terms of physical devastation in Mississippi, actually. The eye of the storm passed through Mississippi. New Orleans was hit because of the dereliction of the US government, particularly the Army Corps of Engineers, who did not fortify the levees. So most of the damage you saw in New Orleans came after the hurricane had long since passed, but they were not prepared, nor did they try to prepare to deal with the floodwaters that would come after it. But the actual physical devastation, in part due to them allowing all these hotel constructions on the Gulf Coast that destroyed all of the different marshlands, which act as a natural barrier to hurricanes, which are a natural occurrence in this area. They've long since destroyed that, so it just came right on the shore and devastated Black and Vietnamese, in particular, fishing communities that have existed on that coast for nearly 100 years. So our program was based upon, like, again, nobody's coming. You got a government which is willfully trying to displace people, because that was a core component of what happened in New Orleans. I won't go into that, but that was a critical piece of what was going on. And that we had to kind of pivot our resources, both politically and economically, to make an adjustment. And Cooperation in Jackson is one experiment in trying to make this adjustment. Now, being kind of prepared for kind of like this post-capitalist sacrifice kind of future, we've always tried to prepare ourselves in the last 7 years to meet urgent crisis in our community. So we felt that we were very well situated and prepared to deal with the pandemic when it came along. Now, we had to make some adjustments early on. We tried to do some mutual aid work, and luckily we were told by some comrades in Italy to kind of back off of that, because they did it. If you remember, Italy was one of the first places to get hit really hard before the United States did. And what they had found that they were not prepared with the protective equipment to deal with this particular type of infestation. So we backed off of that and then found other ways to adjust. And what you're going to see now is what our ways of adjustment were. So the first critical thing that we wind up doing was producing masks for those members in our community who could not get masks. And where our particular project is situated, it's in the heart of the largest concentrated homeless or houseless population in the state of Mississippi. And this is a strategic piece around how Jackson is kind of situated within the state to round up all the poor white and Black folks who are homeless throughout the state, and they drop them in the middle of downtown Jackson for the city to kind of deal with and observe, because they don't want them in their community. Well, we've tried to do our best to embrace everybody within the community and bring them in. So what you see here are different kind of relief and organizing projects that are very central to our work. And we knew that in the early days, when there were no N95 masks, there weren't even enough here for the nurses and the doctors who particularly need them, that there were not going to be enough in our community spread around, nor did folks have the income to do it. So we tried to use the principle of producing for ourselves what we need. So these are our hand-sewn masks, right, that we did several iterations to try to figure out how to do, and we've been doing that. This started in April, and what you're seeing here are scenes from April and May. And we started distributing these free, because what we're trying to do, part of our model, is producing for a need, not producing for a profit, but producing for a need as part of a long-term transition towards an eco-socialist future, as we are seeing and trying to build for, which is based upon producing for human need, not producing for profit. So these are a couple of scenes that you see of folks in our community. You notice most of our folks are wearing masks in the different scenes. It was still a major campaign in our community to get people to understand the necessity to wear masks and to make them as available as possible. And we are now pretty much at a pace where we're producing over 1,000 hand-sewn masks a week and giving those all out for free. And then this is a more specified mass production that you see that our community production cooperative, they do both types of mass, the sewn mass, and then this is a printed mass from a 3D printing machine that we have that requires some human adjustment. And we have been making these basically since May to give primarily to healthcare workers and frontline workers in our community, because these offer more protection than other variants of the mask. So this is here, you see them kind of doing the layout and production. This is all in our own cooperative facility. And this is what the earlier version looks even more fancy, because that's what they're into now, version of what this particular mask gives out. And this is also being given out for free. To date, these take a little bit more work and time and effort to do, since they're printed in part, but we've been able to give out more, 1,000 of these to healthcare workers, primarily doctors, nurses, and grocery store workers and clerks, who also need a great deal of protection and just being sacrificed, you know, being forced to work under these kind of conditions with in our area. You got to realize there are no union protections for workers. That does not exist primarily for most of the workers here in Mississippi and throughout the South. So it's not like they have healthcare leave or overtime or anything of that nature. So we've been doing a bunch of safety equipment that they need. We've also, you know, been able to continue our food production and tried to ramp that up to a major degree. Unfortunately, we just lost the entire crop, our winter crop, because of this freak storm this is going on. But we'll rebound from that. But this is just a quick scene that you see from that. And then the most critical piece, I think, in our end is, you know, if we're really going to create a post-capitalist future, we have to come up with new forms of self-governance and not rely upon, you know, the worn out Pepsi or Coke version of democracy, which is practiced in so many, you know, of our countries, from the imposition of you know, European colonialism and the models that they supposedly laid down for everybody, really just imposed upon all of us. So we have to create that anew. And our ability to try to create that and experiment with doing that new is doing people's assemblies, but we do direct forms of democracy in our community. And these are just some presentations of slides of how we were trying to do this. This is a regular practice for us, but how we were trying to do this in the context of a pandemic. So we weren't infecting each other. So you see everybody kind of doing an exercise here. This is a voting exercise. And you see folks trying to stay 6 feet apart. And us, you know, making sure that there's food and things that folks need in the community that was available. So these are just a couple of the things of what's going on. But the critical thing I'll leave is that in our argument, we know that these types of practices are going on in communities all throughout the world out of necessity. And that is, we are going to build, I think, the alternative future that we need in the margins, in the cracks that already exist, in converting these and democratizing these practices to a large degree, so that we actually practice the new ways of being that we're going to need to live on this earth sustainably. Because as was mentioned, you know, before, this notion that we're going to grow our way out, the economy is going to grow its way out, is only a path to self-destruction. And unless these folks are serious about colonizing the moon and Mars, which we know some of these idiots are, including, you know, Musk and some of these other ones that's already been mentioned, that's only a project for the few, not a project for the rest of us. And if we're going to take care, if we're going to change this, we're going to take care of each other. And that starts with us doing this type of day-to-day on the grind work, working within the margins in our own communities. So I'll stop there in the interest of time.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. You really closed us up and took us home with that one. Yeah, I'm just sorry to hear about the crop at this freak snow sports storm. That's, yeah. But it's also, yeah, somehow affirming to know that you're on the ground doing that work in the community to respond to these kind of disasters or these kind of incidents. in a way that centers those values that we've been talking about in looking at getting out of this capitalist economy and moving to the production for need and not for profit type of space that we want to see. So thank you, Kali, thank you, Lewahan, thank you, Omar, for your wisdom, for your insight, and for your inspiration tonight, and really thinking about actually what are the ways that we can think about structuring alternatives, designing different systems, and moving out of these capitalist systems, which we know are causing more harm and destruction. And yeah, let's find a way out. The questions that have been asked have been answered in the chat, as we don't have time to do a round of questions now, as we're at 6 o'clock. So we'll just wrap up and say a big thank you to the speakers. We're sharing in the chat now the details again of what's next. We'll be back chopping it up again with some more great speakers from across the continent and the diaspora, talking about food, land, and African liberation on the 31st of March at 5 p.m. UTC. So do register for that, get in line and get involved. Thank you, Kali, thank you, Lewahan, thank you, Omar. Follow us, follow the journey. We're 1 minute past, and so I will liberate everyone and be respectful of your time. But yeah, we hope to continue to be in communication, to be in touch, and to be in Pan-African family with one another in these struggles.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.